to introduce Sergeant Amy Wheeler. She's a 19-year-old veteran of law enforcement. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology in 1999 from Mercer University, prior to starting work as a patrol officer in a mid-sized municipal police department in Georgia. At the Macon Police Department, she worked as a patrol officer, field training officer, general instructor, domestic violence investigator, property crime investigator, patrol sergeant, administrative sergeant, crime scene investigator, and retiring from that department as a patrol lieutenant. She moved to Colorado late 2014 after earning a Master of Science in Public Safety Leadership, and which was also from Mercer University. She started with the Loveland Police Department in early 2015, going back to patrol, which she loves. In 2017, she was promoted to sergeant and currently serves as the Professional Standards Unit Sergeant. She's a graduate of the 2001 Georgia Police Corps Program, the 2014 IACP Women's Leadership Institute, and attended the IACP's Leadership Police Organization courses in 2017. She's also a certified Advanced Force Science Specialist with the Force Science Institute. And we really appreciate having somebody with this kind of credentials speak to us tonight. So welcome. Thank you. Always hearing about yourself. Thanks. All right. So when I first got approached for this, so I found out about your group doing our Citizen Academy at the Loveland Police Department. Because a couple of your members had to sit through about 10 weeks of me talking to them about nothing but how we do our jobs. This was a 3.5 hour presentation from different areas over 10 weeks. And they just barely scratched the surface. So I'm now going to try to scratch the surface in a very short amount of time to try to explain to you criminal procedures is really what I kind of boiled this down to, in trying to talk about what types of things that you guys might want to hear about. What I was hearing the most of is just kind of that overarching sense of how do police do their jobs. And like I said, 10 weeks, lots and lots of topics, because it's a team effort. When you talk about the police departments, when you talk about everything that happens, we have so many people that are specialized to do so many different tasks. But then you think about those smaller departments that don't have all the people that can specialize. They kind of have to become experts at everything. And when you look at that, it becomes very, very difficult to see how do you pack all of this into one person and get them to where they can be a good, solid, professional police officer. First thing we have to do is we have to train them. And that takes a long time. So they go through an academy. Now, academies vary from state to state. They vary from region to region as far as what you're looking for from the police officer. So each state has their own kind of licensing boards. So those are what's known as your police officer or peace officer standards and training. That's who certifies police officers. So whenever you hear this person's been a certified police officer, it means the state says they've shown proficiency to be able to enforce laws. And from there, then they have to get a job. Now they have to get employed with the police department, because just because I'm a certified police officer doesn't mean I can start running out there and say, okay, you're breaking the law. I need to do something about that. Because the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is authority. Police officers can do nothing if you don't have the authority to act. Where do we get our authority? Where you're gonna get your authority from the local government. When you sign on with the department, they're gonna have you raise your right hand and you're gonna swear an oath. And you're gonna swear that oath to protect the Constitution, the ordinances, the laws of the state that you're gonna be employed in, the laws of whichever agency it is that employs you. If it's a sheriff's office, where they have county rules. If it's a city police department, you have municipal ordinances. So you have to know where your authority lies. A lot of people talk about the differences between federal, state, county, and police. There are very, very intricate levels of each type of law enforcement. Most people think the federal government, okay, they're the overarching, it's your FBI, Secret Service. But for the most part, how many times do you see those agencies come in to a local jurisdiction? Normally when it's a major type of crime. Normally when whatever type of crime you're involved in kind of overwhelms your local jurisdictions. Why? Because they have their own ideas, and I'm not very well versed as far as what all the federal government does with their law enforcement, because I've not experienced with that. My experience is on a municipal level and with a little bit of a county perspective for a sheriff's office. And we were having a discussion over here about the difference between the two of them. There is a very, very big difference. One of the main differences between the sheriff's office and a police department is going to be how you determine who your agency is. In a sheriff's office, most often, except for Denver, you have an elected sheriff. So there's what's known as a constitutional officer. And with that, they're elected directly by the people. A police department is going to be that opposite side. They're normally appointed by whatever government authority is over that city. So with the city of Loveland, yes, we have a mayor, we have a city council, but we have a city manager. So our city manager is the one that's actually the boss of the police chief. So everybody that's involved in that government, they're gonna help make the decision, but overall, that city manager is the boss. Now, he's still answerable to council. He still gets called before council. He's still gonna have to go in there and talk with council and attend meetings and explain to him, or explain to council what's going on in the community. Because why do people need police departments? Why do they need sheriff's offices? You need them because you need to maintain order. And you're hoping that they're going to be able to address crime issues in the community that affect your community. So your police chief is going to have to be answerable to those decision makers. Because do you want a police chief in there and you go to him and you say, hey, why is crime increasing in this area? And he says, I don't know. And not going to be a very, very long tenured chief. That's the case. Not going to happen. So they have to be aware of the fact that they are answerable to council. But it is a different type of idea. From a sheriff's office perspective, a sheriff does not necessarily have to, depending on where you're at, have any law enforcement background. Sometimes there's a requirement, but it could be very small. Maybe 2 years. Because what do they have to do? They have to win an election. So if they win the election, they only have 2 years of experience, and they might be going against a 40-year veteran officer or veteran deputy, and they decide to choose the 2-year rookie. Well, that's what the community chose. Now all of a sudden this person's sheriff. Now they're going to be in charge of the entire department. Whereas with the police chief, they can set requirements because they're going to appoint them and they're going to hire them. Then it also means they can fire them. How do you fire a sheriff? Unelect them, like somebody else said. Sometimes recalls, get into all of that, but that's kind of the two ways that those two departments function. Then you have to look at, with that authority, cross-jurisdictional lines. Because I'm a city police officer, do I have the authority to go into the county and start enforcing laws? Well, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on the relationship that you have with the surrounding communities. Because in an area like Loveland, we have the Loveland Police Department, we have the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. I think there may be about a 2-mile buffer between us and Fort Collins when you look at the actual city limits. Then you go to our east and you have Johnstown and Windsor, which literally we have a couple of intersections where 3/4 of that intersection is Loveland's responsibility. That one road coming out from this way is somebody else's. So does a citizen that's in the middle of that intersection care if they're involved in a wreck? They just want service. So we have things in place to work with each other so that we can provide services. But that's also because our communities understand that we're all trying to work together. So you do have that ability to create partnerships with different areas. And partnerships are a lot of times how you're going to get some of your bigger stuff accomplished. Drug units. Drug units are going to operate under more large. Our chief has a saying, he says, criminals, they don't believe in jurisdictional boundaries because they're going to commit a crime right here. Do they care that the city limits right here? No, they're going to go over there and they're going to commit a crime over here. And they're going to come back. They're going to go commit a crime in Longmont. They're going to come down to Denver. They're going to commit crimes down here. Just this week, we've recovered a stolen vehicle from Greeley that came to our jurisdiction. We just recovered a stolen vehicle from Wisconsin in our city. They don't care. They don't care about those jurisdictional boundaries. So we have to be able to be innovative and creative when it comes to reaching out with those partners. Most crimes that you're going to have like that, you're going to have to develop those relationships with outside agencies. You're going to have to work well with others. One of the things that they joke about as cops, you know, we don't work well with others. Well, we kind of have to. Luckily, where I'm at, we also have a really good relationship with our fire department and our EMS, so that we're able to accomplish a lot more with our not necessarily our jurisdictional issues, but one of the things that we do with our SWAT team, which is Special Weapons and Tactics. Their job is to go in when it's really bad. Well, we train with our fire department and our EMTs. We actually have members of the fire department and members of our local emergency medical services that are part of the team. We outfit them with vests, we outfit them with gear, and it says very clear on the back of their vest, fire, or EMS, medic, something along those lines, so that we can identify them as to who they are. So hopefully if people see them, they realize, oh, it's not just the police. And everybody goes in there because we understand that when the SWAT team goes in, things can go bad. And when things can go bad, sometimes people get hurt. Well, what do you always hear a lot of times in criticisms? We're not doing enough to help people that we might hurt. Well, what more can we do than to bring the help with us when these things start happening? So you have that function that they take over. So that's not even the same job, but yet it shows how we have to work together to accomplish our goals. Kind of got a little sidetracked on that, but it's something that means a lot to me. Because one of the things that you look at from a police department is the serve and protect. Everybody hears serve and protect. They're like, oh, they don't serve, what do they protect? The big issue on that is it's what they call community expectations. What does your community demand of its police department? Each community wants something different. So if you're gonna write about a police department, you need to know enough about that community that you're writing about as well. Because the community is really gonna be the driving force behind the police department. Because if you have a rural community, somebody like me who's worked inner city for 14 years before I got here, I'm not gonna be the type of cop that you want in those smaller rural areas until I learned what it's like to police there. It was a huge eye-opener coming from a very, very high crime area. Macon, Georgia is probably one of the top 10 to 15 areas for homicides and violent crime, US, for the size of its department, or for the size of its city. It's probably, when I left, it was about 20,000 more people than what we had in Loveland. We had 300 police officers for that community. I worked for the Loveland Police Department, like I said, only 20,000 people less. When I started, we had less than 100 officers. How is that possible? We were overworked in Macon. In Loveland, they always tell me, hey, we're busy. And I'm looking at them going, busy? I have the chance to ride around town and go look for people to pull over. You know, that it's just a different perspective. So knowing enough about the communities where this is happening, you kind of have to develop that as well. And make sure that you're not kind of mismatching your community with your police department. Because we are society's face when you think about the police officers. How do you judge a society when you walk into it? Most of the time you're going to judge it by their crime rates. Is it a good place or a bad place? First thing you look at is, well, what's crime like? Then you say, what's the schools like? So those are your basic things that you're going to look at first. So if we're what you're going to judge them by, well then you better have some pretty good expectations of what you want us to look like. And if those ever start becoming skewed, that's when you start seeing the frictions. And you start hearing about communities that have problems with their local police department and the issues that come along with those. It's really easy to say that the decision on how to fix that is to create this overarching standard for every law enforcement officer, every law enforcement agency nationwide. But look at the difference in the communities. Can you have the same community everywhere? It makes it really, really difficult. So when you try to create that standard and say, well, everybody should be like this, well, maybe your community doesn't want that. Maybe your community wants the officers that are going to go in and go talk to every store owner. So those small town sheriffs, they know all their business owners. Why? Because they're voters. They're going to know all those business owners. They're going to know who they need to go talk to. Police departments, we still do that, but we do it when we can. So we look at ways to engage our community as much as possible. So that's when you have your upper echelon, your police chief. That's going to be the one that everybody in the community sees. They're going to see the police chief. They don't always see that patrol officer that's working for that chief. Those are the ones that the community is going to see if they're on the bad side. And this is one of the things that I teach all of the people that I teach for law enforcement is we deal with a very small percentage of the population. If you're a beat cop, if you're out there answering calls, you're not going to see most people. You're going to see a certain group of people a lot. Because how many of you in here have had a contact with the police? You know, maybe on a traffic stop, maybe seeing one, you know, somewhere in there. But it's not an everyday occurrence. It's not something a lot of people, you know, yeah, there was a cop that came and talked to our group one time. That's what I know. I mean, look at me, I'm 5 foot tall. I'm not exactly imposing. I've been doing the job for 20 years and I'm still here, so obviously I must be doing something right. But I'm not what you would typically look at as this is your normal police officer. You know, I'm not coming in here with bulging muscles and the big idea, but we come in all shapes and sizes, just like everybody else. So with your police department, those officers that are out there working, they get jaded because they start to see the back a lot. As a matter of fact, one of my areas that I look at very, very heavily is something we call officer resilience, officer wellness. Because wellness. And when we talk about that, what we're talking about is think about everything that you guys write about. The dark, the things that most people only want to read about, they don't want to see. You guys are bringing them to life through your words. We see them. We're there, we see these things, we hear them, we hear the screams, we see the body parts, we see the names, and that takes its toll on the officers. So they'll start to get a little jaded, which is why we make sure that we need to think about their well-being and think about their outside contacts. How many people know the cliche story about the drunk detective married 5, 6 times?
Yeah.
You know what? They're real, you know? And sometimes it becomes about the fact that they just start to become people that you don't want to be around. So it's one of those things that it's a reality, that it can happen, but you've also got people that have done this job for several years that are very well adjusted to it. So each individual is going to affect them in a different way, and they have to understand that where does that come from? Where does that hardened edge come from? Because do you think most of them were rookie officers straight out of the academy, walked in day one, and were these grizzled, old, I hate everything? No. These officers, I teach them. I get the opportunity to see them at the very, very beginnings of their career. They're excited. They want to go out and save the world. They want to help people. They want to be there to save people. They want to pull people out of burning cars. They want to solve crimes. They want to be able to kick in doors and, you know, all that exciting stuff that you know the police officers do. Yes, I have kicked in a door before. It was a lot of fun. But so you've got all of those things that you know get you really excited and get you really amped up about doing the job. That's why they're doing it. That's why they want to get into this. They want to get into to help people. But then something can change. They might see something. They might start to feel like no matter how hard they work, people are still going to hate them. I've been called every name you can possibly think of when I've got people in the backseat of my car and I'm driving them to jail. It's not very nice. So I have lots of interesting words to describe me. But these are some of the things that police officers go through. So that's going to tell you a little bit about what a police officer is. Next thing I'm going to transition to is I'm going to kind of talk to you about that criminal process. What are we looking at for an investigation? I've got a bunch of handouts here. You guys can look at, and these are going to be a lot of information on just basic definitions. The different things that we deal with, and here's the thing. Yes, I have a degree in psychology. Yes, I have a degree in public safety leadership. I am not a lawyer, but there's a lot of lawyer talk in my world. So these definitions here are just kind of something that can kind of help you sift through some of the information that you hear about, procedures, different ideas of where this comes from. It also talks about different things in court, different stages that go on there. So I wanted to make sure that you guys kind of had a glossary, because I'm going to use some of these terms, and it might seem a little foreign to you, but this way you got some things that are going to kind of help. So how do investigations work? How do we do what we do? Well, the first thing, when you're going to look just at an investigation, the first thing that we have to have is we have to have the crime. You have to have the crime, or you have to have the perceived crime. Once that happens, that kicks off what we're going to do, because then we have to do our investigation. And as we do our investigation, our end goal in an investigation is to develop probable cause. Probable cause is going to be the standard by which we can make our arrests. And we're going to do this through gathering evidence, witness statements, victim statements, documents. A lot of times people will hand you, especially when you're talking about fraud cases, next thing you know, they're handing you a whole booklet of papers saying somebody's stolen my identity. So we have to take those, we have to go through those. You've got subject interrogations. So there's a difference between a witness and a victim interview and then an interrogation. The interviews, those aren't confrontational. You're trying to get as much good information from the good people as you can. Then you flip over to your interrogation. Those are the ones, getting you locked in a room, trying to figure out, get them to admit to something. Those are some very, very specialized skills on talking to people and trying to convince them, hey, I know you just killed somebody, and I need you to tell me that you just did. That's not something that most people would think. You just think about the worst thing you've ever done. Do you want to admit to it? Probably not. And not only that, you're going to admit it to the person that can make you pay for it. And that's what these detectives do. That's what they do when they go in there, is they convince people that it's in their best interest to tell the truth, even though everything about telling that truth could possibly send them to prison. That's a special person. That's a very, very special person. So when you go through your investigation and you have to lay it out, there's all different kinds of investigations. There's all different pieces to that. But once you do that, you develop your probable cause. Then you're going to get your warrants. So then you're looking for your arrest warrant. With your arrests, all right, I know that's the person that did it, so I'm going to go and I'm going to arrest them. Once that happens, it kicks off the next part. That's why he said the wheels of justice move very, very slowly, which is one of the things that's very frustrating to police officers. Because I can make an arrest today, I might not see court for 2 years. I still have a couple of cases from Georgia because I was doing some major crimes at one point that still haven't gone to trial. I've been gone for 5 years. How is that possible? Doesn't everybody have a right to a speedy trial? Well, they do, but guess what? They don't always want that speedy trial. Sometimes they want to try to prolong it as much as they can. Yes?
How do you remember the events, the information that you remember?
That's when you have to be very, very good at report writing. And you have to make sure that you're documenting enough in the reports that are going to help you through figuring out exactly what it is that you're trying to remember. Notes. Before it comes time for any type of a trial, I'm going to go through trial prep. So I'm probably going to spend a month going over all of my notes, reading my reports, looking back at it, looking at photographs, looking at things that other people did in the case, just so I can remember exactly what happened. Most of the time when you're thinking about ones like that, they're going to be the bigger crimes that are taking that long. Most of the time, they're not going to take that long, but it still does take a very, very long time sometimes. And even if it's a couple of months, traffic officers, how many traffic tickets do you think they write a day? A bunch. Now you think you normally get, what, about 6 weeks or so to pay off that ticket before it goes to court, and then you show up to court and say, okay, I want to contest this. Well, now it's 8 weeks later. How many tickets do you think that officer's written between the time they saw you and the time he gets to court? Well, how does he know? He's taking notes. He's writing on the back of his copy of that same ticket everything he can remember about that stuff when it happens. So that when he gets to the court, they'll say, well, do you recognize this person? And say, well, this is a person that's written right here, then yes, I do recognize the person. It's the person I contacted on that day. Does that mean they remember everything about you? No, it doesn't mean that they could say this is who it is. But yes, they remember you. They remember that stuff because it took the weeks. So we have to be very meticulous in what we do. And it does. It gets to be very, very difficult because there have been some times when I literally had to walk into court and say, I don't remember anything about this case. Because I'm not going to lie. If I lie, I'm done. If I go on the stand and I lie and I try to say I remember something and it comes out that it's not, my career is over. I am done. Because no matter what happens from then on out, all they can say is that, didn't you lie before? So how do we know you're not lying now? And then every defense attorney on every single case that I'm going to be involved in is going to have access to that information and say, well, you're a proven liar. You were proven to be, is it true that you were a proven liar? That's pretty much, yeah. How do you go on from it? You don't. You're not going to recover from that. So prosecutions are very, very interesting because most of the times when you hear about them, it's going to be sensationalized. The number of cases that actually go to these big, huge, trials where everybody's sitting down, it's very, very small. It's very, very small. But the ones that do go, they're juicy. They tend to be pretty good. So those are the ones that are safe for the very end. Because from the arrest until you go to trial, there are motions because people want to suppress evidence. People want to try to tear apart everything about your investigation. They want to try to say, well, you can't talk about this. You don't want to talk about this. And then they're going to say, okay, well, now we're going to do plea bargaining. So all this stuff is going on behind the scenes. before you even get in front of a judge for the actual trial. So then you get to the trial. You have reasonable doubt. When people hear reasonable doubt, there are jury instructions that a judge is going to give to them and say, reasonable doubt is not 100% certainty. How many things in life are you 100% certain about? Very, very few. But could you just really go, no, there's just a chance he might not have done it. Could that be reasonable to say, man, you know, we're getting ready to pass judgment on somebody. And how like he might not have done it. But is that enough reason to say the victim doesn't get served? So I think probably the hardest job in the entire criminal justice is the jurors. Because they're not taking police officers. They're not taking lawyers. You might get one or two of them on there. They're taking you guys. They're taking peers. They're taking people from the community. And then we're going to sit you in front and we're going to spend all this time talking about legal terms. We're going to show you pictures. We're going to take you to a crime. We're going to try to convince you that it happened this way and this is how we can prove it. And then we put it on you. Put it on the jurors and say, okay, it's up to you to decide. That's a powerful thing. How much training do jurors get? They get instructions every now and again that says, don't talk to anybody about anything that you're hearing when you go to lunch. Now you're with a bunch of strangers, and they say, okay, now you got to go to lunch, and especially if it's a high profile one, you're going to have to eat lunch together. But yet, you can't talk about the one thing all of you have in common, which is why you're there. That's a tremendous thing that we do. And that's where when you start looking at society and you start trying to piece it together, is that us as police officers, we need you. We need our society members because we can arrest people all the time. But until we go all the way through to the completion, it doesn't matter. Because I can arrest him, and I can keep arresting him. But ultimately, society is the one that judges. And I have to teach my police officers that a lot because with that authority and with that badge comes a huge amount of power. I am one of the few people in this country, when I say few, it's close to 1 million, that has the ability to walk in and take away and suspend someone's rights. Because everybody has certain freedoms, right? But when I arrest you, I temporarily take away your freedom. You can't go anywhere. You can only go where I tell you to. Society gives me that power, so I have to respect that power. Are there officers that don't? Absolutely. Are there officers that think that they don't do their jobs if somebody gets acquitted? Absolutely. That's one of the other things that kind of adds to that jaded mentality, is because you pour all of your heart and soul. You have this victim, especially when you start thinking about child victims. You have this victim that was a victim of a horrible assault or an abuse. You do everything that you can to try to help this person. But who did I say you're going to bring it to? You're going to bring it to each other. You don't know what's going to happen. The only thing that you can do is do the best that you can. But what happens when they look around and they say, not guilty? And you look at that victim and you're going to feel like it's dead. You're going to feel like you let them down. That's a burden. It's a pretty heavy burden to carry around as police officers. Yes.
Speaking of burdens, there was a news story playing today on public radio about a police officer who shot somebody. Shot somebody like 5 times or something like that. And he said it was justified, but he can't get himself through it. And he's like an emotional and mental wreck. I don't know if you or anybody who knows had an experience like that. But how do you get somebody like that back in their feet?
That is an entirely different discussion. And that is one that I can come back and talk with you guys about as far as what we call critical incidents. One of the things that I am certified in is what we call force science. And I am a use of force expert when it comes to what a body goes through, what a mind goes through when they're exposed to a critical incident, such as an officer involved shooting. There are a lot of things that happen to the officer's perceptions. There's a lot of things that happen to them just in the mindset of, especially if they end up having to take someone's life. There's moral implications there. There's religious implications there. There's a lot of factors that go into it. And luckily enough, I'm fortunate at my department, we have a psychologist that works with us. If we didn't have that, that's a good question. How do you combat this? How do you look at somebody and have those conversations and expect that police officer to be able to say, oh, that was just my job? Because no matter what, it's a person.
I would imagine that even if you thought or believed that what you do is justified, that it would be a heavy burden.
Absolutely. Because remember, why did that young cop get into the job? He wanted to change the world and help. Well, what's the opposite of that? Then you have to take somebody's life. It's hard. Yes.
So that's really heavy. I'm gonna
Yeah,
divert to something else.
absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about when you have to give an arrest warrant versus just arresting?
Yes. This is the difference between warrantless and warrant arrests. This is when you start looking at the fact that how can I go make that arrest right now versus I have to go apply for this warrant. If you're doing a long drawn investigation, you're going to need an arrest warrant. When you're talking about warrantless situations, those are more of the ones that happen right afterwards. So if I go into a store and somebody has just stolen something, so we have a shoplifting. Store says they stole stuff. I've got the stuff right here. There's my probable cause. Okay, this happened right here. I'm empowered to make that arrest right then. I don't have to go, wait a minute, okay, I've got all this, yes, there's my probable cause, here's my proof that it occurred, here's my reasonable proof that it occurred. Stay right here while I go track down a judge and get a judge to sign a warrant. It's not going to happen. So they empower us to do warrantless arrests. Warrantless arrests are arrests made because the officer has immediate knowledge that the crime has just occurred. So if I have a DUI and I stop somebody and I feel like they're under the influence and I have my evidence that I gather, I can make that warrantless arrest. Now with the warrantless arrest, you have a certain amount of time period before you have to get that person before a judge. Because you have to prove that you have the probable cause to arrest them. Now, if they bond out prior to that, that's one of the things that can happen. Because they do not have to sit in jail until they go in front of the judge, depending on the charge. Now, if it's some of those more kidnapping types or ones like those, yeah, they're going to have to sit their domestic violence. They will not give a domestic violence perpetrator a bond until they see a judge. They have to see a judge. Because when they get out, in order to get out, they have to agree not to go back and beat up the victim again. And that sounds kind of weird, but they put in what's called protective orders. And those protective orders are basically a piece of paper that says, hey, don't go do that. Now, if you violate it, then we can arrest you for that plus another charge. But those are the main differences between arrest warrants and the warrantless. The beat cops in the middle of the night are going to deal mainly with the warrantless arrests. Your detectives, those are going to be the ones that are going to be on board with warrants. Anything that requires that follow-up, that extra effort, is going to be where you're going to have to go apply for a warrant. Going along the same thing with arrest warrants is search warrants. Search warrants are also based on probable cause. You have to go apply for them the same basic way. There's some timing issues. When you apply for a search warrant, you have to serve that search warrant within 10 days. If you don't, it becomes null and void.
Is that the state? Is that your state?
The warrant,
Yeah, the 10 days.
the 10 days, that's pretty much standard for almost every jurisdiction that I've ever seen, is that it's going to be that 10 days. Most people don't want to wait the 10 days because, especially if you're trying to go do a drug search warrant, if you're basing that on a confidential informant because they just came from a house and they just bought drugs and you're trying to get that, you don't want to wait 2 days because those drugs probably aren't going to be there. So you want to go as soon as possible. We have to do search warrants on the majority of the things that we're going to look into. So whether it be a phone, because I know you guys did the digital forensics. So everything that he was teaching you about, gathering up the evidence, well, in order to look at any of it, they've got to go get a search warrant to actually look into all of that digital evidence. They can't just say, well, we took it from you, now we can start looking at it. You got that process. House and search warrants, same deal. Anything that you put in your search warrant. So if I say I'm looking for a cooler and pictures and stuff like that, I'm looking for items that are like this large. I can't go and find a tiny little drawer and open that drawer up. Say I open up that drawer and I find evidence of all kinds of stuff. But if they say, if you were looking for that cooler, could that cooler have been in that drawer? So why did I go in that drawer? If I'm looking for that. So those are the things where they have to be very, very specific on what they're going to go do. Yes.
So can they, you come in and you're like, oh, I want to look in that drawer now. You have to call, I assume you have to get another search warrant, but will they give it to you after already giving you the first?
Depending on why you want to look in there. You have to have probable cause to look for something in there. And you have to explain to them why you all of a sudden think there's something in there. You can't just go in, well, I walked in and I was looking for this. They had a lock on this drawer. And it's unusual for people to have a lock on a small drawer inside of the house. I mean, so there's something back there they don't want me to see. Well, then I want a search warrant to be able to see in there. Judge is going to say, wow. I have to have a reason. Yes.
Speaking of warrants, what's the difference between a knock on the door, a open the door or will break in, or a no knock where you just kind of charging levels of whatever?
No knock warrants are most typically done in drug situations or in situations where they may feel like the announcement of the officer and us standing at the door going, Police department, open the door, we've got a search warrant for all of those drugs and all of that evidence to all of a sudden disappear. Because the first thing when they start going through the doors and they break those doors, where's the first thing that bad guys go to?
Well,
The bathroom to start flushing drugs. Because if they're out, then we can't get them. So that's where your no-knocks tend to come in. Your other no-knocks tend to be when you're dealing with certain situations where you have somebody that you don't want them to know that you're coming. It's a very dangerous situation. I've seen a friend of mine get killed because of a no-knock warrant. I don't like them, but they are done for certain circumstances. The other thing is that knock and announce. Well, how much time do I have to give for a knock and announce? Police department, we're here with a warrant. Boom. I knocked, I announced. Because if I have that search warrant, I have the authority to get into that house. So if I have that search warrant and somebody does come to the door when I knock on it, and they say, you can't come in. I said, I've got a warrant to search premises. And they say, I don't care, can't come in. I can now arrest you. I can move you out of the way, and I'm going in the house. Most of the time, you're going to show up, you're going to have the warrant. If it's not something that you think was going to require you to kick in the door, just don't kick in the doors.
Even though it's fun.
Even though it is a lot of fun. You don't, the thing is that you give people the opportunity to respond, depending on the type of moment. The last thing that I want to touch on is going to be your Miranda advisements. Most people think about Miranda, and you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, you have the right for all of this stuff. Well, one of the things that we get criticized for almost the exact most is after I lock somebody up, I tell them you're under arrest, you're under arrest for this, turn around, change pen back, put them in cuffs, stick them in the backseat of my car, take them down to the station for the shoplifting. They're like, well, you never read me Miranda. Okay. I never asked you any questions related to the crime. Now, does that mean I can't ask them their name? Certain things that we need for their identification? No, I can ask them basic questions. I can't just ask them, did you commit that crime? If I don't read a Miranda. I can't ask them about specifics of the crime if I don't read a Miranda. Now, if I don't, does it make my arrest improper? No. It means whatever statements they make are inadmissible. And there's a whole hearing to determine that. So when everybody hears the whole Miranda, everybody hears, oh, as soon as you put somebody in cuffs, you have to read a Miranda. No, you don't. It's one of those big things that people have come to expect and believe, but it's just not the case. That kind of gets me, like I said, that does get me to the end of this one. Like I said, all I'm doing is just kind of scratching that surface, because when you start looking at the more nuanced parts of your writing and those such things, you need to know specifically what you're going for and what you're talking with. I have some cards. I will leave you my card.
Okay.
Like I said, I am a use of force expert as well. That is a totally different topic and is an extremely important topic. Those are definitely things that you might want to think about in the future, looking into. Yes,
Take just a second here for us procedural people.
absolutely.
We got levels of authority. ranks,
Yes.
paramilitary ranks. Okay. Traffic stop, patrol,
Mhm.
something suspicious. You call the shift supervisor, or when did they have to call for a sergeant? When does the sergeant call for a detective? You know, what is Nebraska? I mean, as it escalates up the ladder, who's
That-
called for what?
Right, that's gonna be a lot more of agency dependent on what you're gonna do with that. But detectives tend to come in if the crime is going to take a lot of investigations. Patrol officers tend to handle most of their own investigations. That's when you start talking about those routine calls. He gets there, he does a traffic stop, comes across some drugs, he's gonna handle that entire investigation. But now say those drugs, he finds out that these drugs are being sold to somebody else because the guy says, hey, look, I want to tell you, I'm just this low-level dealer. I want to start telling you about these bigger fish. You're going to call that detective. That patrol officer isn't going to keep on that. But they'll probably involve that patrol officer with the investigation because that's kind of that payoff.
When does he have to call for a supervisor to patrol?
Patrol officers tend not to call for supervisors unless somebody's really upset with them. I want to see your supervisor. For the most part, police officers are out there doing their jobs. There's really not going to be much that they're going to have to call the police officer or the supervisor to the scene. But when it comes time for arrests and you do the warrantless paperwork is normally where your sergeants come. Your sergeants come in your paperwork. Your lieutenants, they basically just want to know everything that's going on because they're responsible for 24 hours a day, but they don't work the 24 hours a day. And then your captains, they're the ones that are your more politician type ones. They're going to kind of be that overarching balance between the chief and the officers.
One quick question. You mentioned that police officers don't necessarily go out into the county, surrounding county, to do law enforcement. How about sheriff's deputies inside the city,
They have complete authority to do so,
everywhere in the county?
but a lot of times they tend to defer to the city. They let the city take care of the city because they have their own police force, and so they tend to spend most of their time outside.
Thank you.
Because I'm an eye from Boulder, who's done volunteer work for the Boulder Police Department, along with the Boulder Sheriff's Office. And I would tell any writer who's going to write, the kind of stuff most of us write, that we use a real town and talk about that town's police department, the sheriff's office. Be sure you contact that agency because Boulder does it all differently than the rest of, we don't have captains, we don't have lieutenants, all of them. And you can run in, if you, don't write about Boulder unless you call. Don't write about Loveland unless you call, find out how they do things. That's a very good point.
Thank you.
I love it.